Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. Today we're looking at one of the most famous, historically significant, and frankly, widely discussed psychological frameworks ever proposed. I'm talking about Sigmund Freud's theory of personality development. Now, regardless of how modern psychology views it today, Freud's central claim was absolutely bold for its time. He proposed that the core aspects of your personality, well, they're established very early in life, they remain incredibly stable throughout your adulthood, and they can really only be changed with a lot of difficulty. So in this explainer, we're going to impartially map out exactly how Freud believed this process happens, step by step. Freud actually organized human development into 5 distinct chronological phases. First up is the oral stage in the early months, then the anal stage around ages 2 and 3. Moving right into ages 4 and 5, we hit the phallic stage. That's followed by the latency stage from age 7 to puberty, and finally, post-puberty, the genital stage. We're going to unpack exactly what happens in each of these because in Freud's view, you absolutely must successfully navigate every single one of them to achieve true psychological maturity. So before we jump into the timeline, we need to define the overarching engine driving this whole journey, psychosexual development. Basically, this theory suggests we are all driven by instinctual energy, and as a child grows, the focus of this energy literally shifts to different parts of the body. The fundamental idea here is that early childhood experiences aren't just passing phases, they are the concrete foundation of an adult's personality. And, as you'll see, problems or severe stress encountered at any one of these 5 stages can quite literally arrest a person's development, leaving a huge, lasting impact on their adult life. All right, let's start at the very beginning of human life with stage 1, the oral stage. Think about a newborn infant for a second. Their instincts are entirely focused on the mouth. It's the primary center for seeking pleasure and interacting with their environment. I mean, it makes sense, right? It's through the mouth that a baby obtains the food necessary to reduce hunger and just survive. But Freud argued it goes way beyond basic survival. The infant achieves gratification through feeding, sure, but also through things like thumb sucking, biting, and babbling. So why does this matter for a long-term personality? Well, Freud theorized that it's during these crucial early months that our most basic foundational feelings about the entire world are established. And this early imprint can be incredibly persistent. In fact, the source material notes that an adult who considers the world a bitter place probably had difficulty during the oral stage of development. If an infant's needs aren't properly met during this specific phase, the theory suggests it creates a permanent imprint. This can lead to an adult who is fundamentally pessimistic, cynical, or just generally distrustful of the world around them. Moving forward on our timeline to ages 2 and 3, we enter the second phase, the anal stage. Now, this stage represents a massive shift in a child's life because it's when the demands of society first truly enter the picture. Around ages 2 and 3, parents typically begin toilet training. They demand that the child learns to control bodily functions, specifically urination and defecation. According to Freud, the anal area of the body becomes the new focus of pleasurable feelings. But this creates a major conflict, a real clash between the child's desire for babyish instinctual pleasure and the parent's demand for adult-controlled behavior. This specific stage is theorized to be the very foundation of the conflict between our primal desires, known as the id, and our rational societal control, known as the ego. Now we transition to ages 4 and 5, which brings us to the phallic stage. During this period, the focus shifts to the genitals, and children begin to realize the physical differences between males and females. They also become aware of sexuality and the relationship between their parents. Freud outlined a very specific emotional sequence here. For young boys, he called this the Oedipus complex, named after the Greek myth. It unfolds in 3 steps. First, the male child experiences love for the mother and actually feels hostility toward the father, viewing him as a rival. Second, this hostility leads to a deep fear of punishment or castration by the father. And third, the boy achieves a major developmental milestone by resolving this complex. He does this by accepting the father's relationship with the mother and choosing to model his own behavior after his father, essentially identifying with him. Freud also proposed a corresponding sequence for female children, which is often referred to as the Electra complex. The sequence follows a very similar structural logic, but with the figures reversed. In step 1, the girl experiences the complex, involving an affectionate attachment to the father. In step 2, to resolve the complex, she gives up these desires. And finally, in step 3, she resolves the remaining tension by identifying with her mother. In both cases, navigating this really complex emotional territory is seen as absolutely essential for developing mature gender identity and adopting societal norms. Once those intense early conflicts are finally resolved, we enter a completely different period, the latency stage. Let's see how this builds on the previous stages. The latency stage lasts from about age 7 all the way until the onset of puberty. After the turbulence of the phallic stage, things really quiet down psychologically. While physical growth steadily continues, those sexual urges become relatively inactive. So what happens to all that instinctual energy? Well, it gets redirected. Children channel their energy outward into the world. They focus heavily on social activities with peers and achievement-related tasks like schoolwork, sports, and hobbies. It's essentially a massive period of skill building and socialization.
Following the quiet of the latency stage, puberty hits, and we arrive at the fifth and final phase, the genital stage.
This stage is the culmination of Freud's entire developmental timeline. The ultimate goal here is the attainment of true psychosexual maturity. With the physical changes of puberty, the sexuality, fears, and repressed feelings from those very early stages, those oral, anal, and phallic conflicts we just talked about, are once again exhibited and brought back up to the surface. However, the objective now is to process them as an emerging adult. The individual must learn to deal with members of the opposite sex in a way that is both socially acceptable and sexually mature. But what happens when a person fails to navigate these stages successfully? That brings us to the consequences: fixation and regression. Freud postulated that as children proceed from one stage to another, they are constantly adjusting their view of the world. But if the journey is marked by excessive stress, trauma, or even overindulgence, they might fail to pass through a stage successfully. There are two main consequences to this. First is fixation. This is when development gets entirely arrested at an earlier stage. The person gets emotionally stuck there. The second consequence is regression. This occurs when a person's resolution of problems at any given stage is less than adequate. So, when they face severe stress later in life, they actually go backward, displaying behaviors typical of a much less mature stage of development. Let's look at a highly specific example directly from the source text to see how fixation actually manifests in real life. Remember the phallic stage and the Oedipus complex we discussed earlier? Well, if a boy fails to pass successfully through this stage, his development is arrested. He fails to resolve the complex and might continue to feel hostile toward his father. According to the text, the long-term consequence for his adult life could be quite stark. He may grow up to feel that men, in general, are hostile to him, leading him to strictly seek out dependable relationships only with females. His entire adult worldview is heavily colored by a single unresolved childhood conflict.
And that brings us to the end of our timeline. We've explored how Freud believed our earliest instincts and conflicts, from the oral stage all the way to the genital stage, build the unshakable foundation of our adult selves. While modern psychology has obviously evolved significantly since these ideas were first proposed, it is undeniable that this framework forever changed how we think about childhood development. So, looking back at this journey, I'll leave you with this question. According to Freud's theory, your core was locked in years ago. If you were to analyze your own habits, fears, or personality traits today, which early stage do you think shaped you the most? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep exploring.